Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name, we pray. Amen. What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and joining us this week for the third time is international whistleblower and investigative journalist Mike Volpe. Mike's work spans from covering topics such as politics, immigration reform, police corruption, and everything in between. And some of his greatest work is what he's doing to expose the corrupt secret family court and the child trafficking racketeering taking place globally within and throughout Family Court and CPS. Mike's work covering the most explosive stories in the world surrounding these corrupt systems has been recognized globally, and he continues to be on the forefront of the movement to save our children. If you haven't listened to the first two episodes I've done with Mike, I'll link those below in the show notes and highly recommend you listen to both, as each time he's been on, we've covered a different and valuable topic related to corruption in the court, and he's arming us with the tools we need to understand the inner workings of these very complex systems. This week, we will be covering what I believe to be an extremely important topic: wrongful convictions. This is a topic that I'm grateful he's bringing to the forefront of conversations, because if you've been listening to my podcast and have eyes to see and ears to hear, you will see that it's not a stretch to say that people being accused of crimes they did not commit appears to be something we can see happening all over the world today more than ever. Mike's consistent deep dives into researching hard topics such as this are what I believe sets him apart from many standing on the front lines in the fight for justice in the court systems and for our children. He's covered stories all over the world in his work and has proven time and time again that corruption in the courtroom is not random, nor is it uncommon. Get a paper and pen, because you're going to need it for this episode. Without further ado, I'm honored to have back on the show highly sought after journalist, courageous whistleblower, and someone who is going to go down in history as a hero who gave a voice to parents, children, and everyone in between all over the world who don't have a voice. Mike Volpe. Thank you so much for being here with me today, Mike.
Thank you for having me, Emma.
Absolutely. It's my honor. I'm really, really excited for today because it's a little bit of a different topic than what we've been talking about.
It is, and I sent you 6 articles, but I actually thought of this as you were speaking. I've done wrongful convictions for a long time, because the first book I wrote, which is called Prosecutors Gone Wild: The Trial of Chuck Panici, John Gagliatoni, and Louise Marshall, that was a wrongful conviction. That was actually, I've done a lot of complex cases, none more than that. It took an entire book. And that was Chuck Panici. I worked with Chuck for almost 2 years. And one of the reasons why it's an important topic is because I really got to know him. He was a really good guy. He's passed away since then. But he was a powerful mayor, but especially a powerful committeeman, which, if you don't understand a committeeman, their job is to get votes. And that could mean nothing if you can't get any votes. But he could get a lot of votes, for not for himself. For himself, he could as well, but that wasn't the committeeman's job. So if you can deliver votes, that makes you very, very powerful. So Chicago Heights that's where he was mayor of Chicago Heights, has a very long and deep history of corruption, because it used to be a transit point for the underground liquor that Al Capone and his gang used to use. And in fact, there's a crew there that they call the Chicago Heights crew. And what's crazy is the head of the crew, and I don't know if I'm going to remember the guy's name, he was born a block and a half away from where Chuck lived, the head of the Chicago Heights crew. So it had a long history of corruption, and the FBI came down there. They actually got the mobster first, and they kept going after people And what happened was there were several people who were corrupt in Chuck's administration, but he didn't do anything wrong. But when those people were facing long prison sentences, they agreed to testify against him. They basically told the government and the jury what they wanted to hear, and that was enough. And it was very astounding that with no actual evidence, the only evidence was a guy named Nick LeBou who was facing like 20, 30 years, and he got like 8 months. There's a guy named Ralph Galderio who was Chuck's friend since they were like kids, who testified against him, lied about him, his friend for all. And by the way, without Chuck, Ralph would have been homeless, because every time Ralph needed a job, it was Chuck who got him one. Chuck was a small business owner before then, got him jobs in administration, and that's how he paid him back. But people who got deals would just stand up there and say, yeah, Chuck took a bribe. I was there. He told me, he passed it along. I passed it along to him. No evidence of the actual trail, no video. There was supposedly gold that was used as bribes. None of that is evidence, just these people saying it. And he got convicted. And you can see how easy it is for somebody to be wrongfully convicted, because the government has a lot of power. They have a lot of tools to use. And the other thing that really bothered me was the government was definitely corrupt in his case. His lawyers definitely could have done a better job, though I think they did a good enough job to get him off, but the jury did a poor job. There was, I'm biased. I like Chuck. I spent a lot of time with him, but I went through that trial pretty in depth, and it was nowhere near guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Yeah, you might go into the jury room and think he was guilty. Yeah. You can possibly, the main witness said, I don't recall 800 times during his testimony. I mean, 800 questions that he couldn't recall the answers to, and he's the main witness. So how do you convict the guy when the main witness has so little credibility? And so that's part of the problem with wrongful convictions is we as jurors, and we're all jurors, you don't like it, you try to get out of it, but you're all potential juror. We don't do a really good job of analyzing. We don't do a good job of holding the government to their standard. Your job as a juror is to decide if it's a criminal trial, is to decide if the prosecution met its burden of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, not to figure out if the person is guilty, because you weren't there. Almost no way you'll ever figure out for sure if someone is guilty or not guilty. But did the government meet its standard? And I think too many people go into the jury room and they try to figure out, do I think they're guilty? And that's not your job. It sounds like it's the same, but it's really not. And so I think wrongful convictions happen a lot more than anyone realizes. And it is a topic that some people talk about. And by the way, one of the main ones is Kim Kardashian, whenever you think of her. She talks about this a lot. She puts her money where her mouth is, literally. She funds people who are wrongfully convicted, tries to get them lawyers, pays for the lawyers, or at least helps pay, pays in other ways, and she's got the money. It's not that big a deal, but and this isn't, she gets some publicity. Look, she uses her publicity to give it publicity as well. She gets some good press, but she's not doing it for the press. So on this, she does a really good job. Helen Prégine, who Susan Sarandon played, she's still alive. She does a lot on this, particularly in death penalty cases, because she's anti-death penalty. But the people who are exonerated do a good job. The Innocence Project, and there's a Kathleen. I'm not going to remember her name, but she represents Steve Avery from Making of a Murderer. She's an excellent lawyer, Kathleen Zellner. She supposedly has gotten 20 people exonerated from wrongful convictions. I'm not sure if that number is accurate. There's a case, Ryan Ferguson, that she definitely got the guy off. But there isn't, and well, the Innocence Project is pretty big, but like with Family Court, this is a topic that doesn't get nearly enough publicity, and it should. And if people really understood what was happening in a lot of our criminal cases, they'd be shocked and they'd want change. And part of the problem is the whole system is predicated on deals. So whether you're guilty or not, the government's going to pressure you to take a deal. And even if you're innocent, there's ways for the government to make you deal, because they're going to offer you a very small sentence if you take the deal. And they're going to say, if you don't, and we find you guilty, we're going to ask for a lot. And so a lot of it, that's why a lot of innocent people, you can look this up, a lot of innocent people plead guilty, and it's because they're pressured in that way. So I think that was my monologue. We're going to talk about 6 cases. I believe the first one involves our current FBI director. His name is Chris Wray. And this is a case from when he was still a relatively young assistant U.S. attorney, I believe in Atlanta. And hold on, you know what? Oh, okay. We'll start. That's the second one. Let's talk about this one. I got them mixed up. This is a pretty interesting case, and I just talked today with this guy from prison for about 10 minutes. So his name is Randall Rahr. He's been convicted of some very awful crimes, including possession of child pornography, using the internet for child. I don't remember the exact technical term, but the main one is a child molestation charge. I'm going to put the other 2 to the side, because even if he's guilty of those, he's been in jail 16 years, he wouldn't be there. This charge is extremely dubious because it was something that he supposedly did in 1990 to a 5-year-old, and she didn't come forward, and that was after the cops came to her, until she was 21. So she testified as a 21-year-old to things that purportedly happened to her at 5, and somehow he got found guilty. Now, there's some other things. He sent it to me, and I got from him some psychologist notes of this girl. She was apparently molested at 5, just wasn't him. When she was like 6, she was telling the psychologist there was a guy named Jimmy. His name is Randall. And Jimmy was her babysitter, not Randall. Randall was the neighbor. She never pointed the finger at Randall. It was always Jimmy until years later. And Randall believes that he was targeted because he was investigating the Michigan Department of Corrections, the Michigan government, and specifically a string of serial killings that happened in 1976 and 77. And he told me today, and then if you can scroll back up to the top photo. So that's from a press release from when they convicted him and indicted him. Now, if you can keep going up a little bit more, I think there's, Attorney General, agency, Attorney General, that may not mean anything to you, but that's the Michigan Attorney General's office. Now, generally, a crime like this would be handled by what they call a district attorney, usually in most states, but the county prosecutor, whatever is the title, in the specific county. For whatever reason, I've asked the Michigan Attorney General's office, they took the case. Now, possession of child pornography is bad. Child molestation is bad, but, so is murder. And usually it's still the district attorney who does the murder cases, the child molestation cases. For whatever reason, this guy, the Attorney General, wanted this particular case. And you can see by the long press release that he put out, and that was Mike Cox. He's no longer the Attorney General, but he made a big deal out of convicting Randall. And of course, and he claimed that there was a dungeon room. Randall says there was no dungeon room. The possession of child porn, he said I had a nudist colony magazine, and they turned that into possession of child porn. There was no child porn on his computer. That came out not at trial, but during a hearing. So they got him for this nudist colony magazine, and then they got him because a 21-year-old supposedly talked about things that she was saying when she was 5. Finally, when they first raided his house, the cops said to him, the Attorney General is looking into you. And then they started asking him about this string of serial killings, which were notorious in Michigan in 1976, 1977. And then all of a sudden, the media starts putting out articles that make him a suspect in those serial killings. And of course, he didn't do it. We know he didn't do it because 16 years later, he's not even been charged, let alone convicted of those charges. They just came up with something. And right here, you can see the 59-year-old defendant, that he was 59 at the time in 2006, was convicted of sexually assaulting his then 5-year-old neighbor in the summer of 1989, 1990. In April 2006, so now 16 years later, police received information that caused them to investigate defendant and canvass his former neighborhoods. At the time, they had contact with the victim, who alleged the defendant had sexually assaulted her when she was 4 or 5 years old. So isn't that convenient? They raid his house, find a nudist colony magazine, turn that into possession of child porn, then go around his neighborhood, and all of a sudden this girl who never pointed the finger at him before goes, oh yeah, Randall, my old neighbor 16 years ago must have done it. Once again, I want to see more details of the case, but still, I got to ask, if you were on the jury, you really think that's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt? A 21-year-old talking about things that happened to her when she was 5? There's no other evidence. You got a 16-year time difference. How in the world did you go back in that jury room and say that single piece of testimony is enough to convict? It's ridiculous. And so this thing right here, this photo, is from the, if you can scroll down a little bit more, they'll see it. Right at the bottom, keep going. Right there, she's talking about Jimmy. Jimmy's in quotation marks. She said, one thing that Jimmy did, he licked me. She looked, I think, disgusted as she said it, and her face turned red. And so she's talking about Jimmy. Randy, I think they called him Randy. Randy's not in here. That's from a psychologist report within a year or so of these incidents occurring. She definitely did have something happen to her bad. But at the time she was saying Jimmy, and, you know, I don't think she has bad intentions, but come on. How do you convict somebody based on that kind of testimony? That's a failure of the jury, and that's all of us. So that's why this is important. If you vote, you have a chance to be a juror, and that's the second. And there's 63 of these, he told me. But that's a second psychological note. The other thing that he told me is he didn't even see this until after the trial. I don't know if the prosecution didn't give it to the defense. This was called a Brady violation from a Supreme Court case called Brady versus Maryland, when they withhold what they call exculpatory evidence, which means evidence that will help the other side. They're not allowed to do that. The prosecution gathers evidence. They are required to give the other side everything that's pertinent. And by the way, Brady violations are not that uncommon. There's a lot of bad prosecutors who will withhold evidence. There are all sorts of people in all sorts of American jails right now because a prosecutor did not give the defense evidence that the defense could have used to prove them innocent. I don't know if that happened. The other thing is probably they did get it. They didn't use it. And that's malpractice and definitely worthy at least of trying to appeal on ineffective counsel. But that should have been introduced to trial. And and you want another thing? And look, with the criminal justice system, there definitely is a racial component. It is a financial component, not a racial component, as OJ proved many, many years ago. But if you are poor, you won't have the right lawyer to counter this. But most of the poor people are minorities. But if Randall had the money, I think that he probably would have been found not guilty. But I don't think he got very good assistance. And so this is him explaining right here, if people are viewing it, what led up to the raid. And as you can see, he was doing Freedom of Information Act requests, and then he was reaching out to politicians, and I think that word got back. And that's what he believes. Certainly the timing, and if you can see, it says on May 4th, I was raided, and he was asking for FOIA requests first in 2005, then April 2006, and then suddenly gets raided. So it might be a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences. That's circumstantial. But he certainly believes that his investigations into the Michigan Department of Corrections, those 4 murders in Oakland County, that's near Detroit, had something to do with the fact that he's in jail now. And so that's Randall Rahr. And so can we get to the second story? I think the second one involves Chris Ray. The second one involves Chris Ray, who is a the FBI director, but this is from when he was a budding young federal prosecutor. And so he was investigating a guy named Robert Ethan Miller. And he, not him, but he was approached by a guy named Troy Plant. And Plant claimed that he and Miller had orchestrated a scheme to kill Miller's ex-girlfriend. And then they were approached by another guy named Guy Henson, who backed up Plant's story. And many years later, it came out. And you know what? I gave you the one that has that's behind the paywall. But many years later, Plant recanted, put into an affidavit multiple times that he had recanted. I did communicate with him when he was in jail. And by the way, he's a career criminal. He's been in jail most of his adult life. He recanted to me. Guy Henson recanted, but even more interestingly, I want to get back to Guy Henson. A guy named Elaine Vera did not recant. He did provide an affidavit that said that he had approached Miller's defense attorney, and he told him that Henson and Plant were lying, that he was a part of this scheme. The scheme was never about killing anyone, that they were just going to do a relatively small drug deal. And so Miller probably is guilty of a crime. However, this all happened in the 1990s. Whatever crime he committed, he should have been out of jail long ago. The other thing is that Plant claimed in here, I have never before told anyone this, how viciously Mr. Ray threatened me, and that's Troy Plant. Plant said that Ray threatened him. Henson said that Ray threatened him. The problem is with Henson is that his affidavit came out in 2017. However, according to stories that I found online, someone with the name Guy Henson died in 2016. And I don't think there are that many Guy Henson, so I don't know how a man who was dead wrote an affidavit. On the other hand, I have it, and you can look, you'd have to pay for the paid subscription. You can look behind the paywall, but it's pretty detailed. It's describing somebody's life. Maybe whoever wrote it was describing their own life. Basically, he said that Ray and others threatened him and said that if he didn't go along with it, they'd make sure he never saw his son again. Obviously, technically, federal prosecutors don't have the power over child custody. However, a federal prosecutor tells you that. They do in a sense. Federal prosecutors do all sorts of things if there's findings coming enough, and they can put pressure in different ways. But both people who testify against Miller
the audio sounds a little scratchy.
Yeah. Should I? Let me see. Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll try it this way, and then I'll go back to the other way. So,
according to Google Books, a longtime observer of the human condition, Curtis combines a wry wit with.
All right. Hopefully that didn't come up. So, all right. So I think that's it for that one. So Ray is in, and look, Miller's still in jail. One other thing, Miller, I don't know if he's still there, but at the time that I wrote this, Miller was at something called the Communications Management Unit, which is a part, there's two of them, one in Terre Haute, Indiana, one in Marion, Illinois, and that's a euphemism. It's basically a black site prison where they put mostly jihadis, except Miller is not a jihadi. They put a few white guys they call balancers. The stuff that happens at these prisons is very bad. They don't get very much publicity. They get a little bit. None that the government ever wants. The government would rather you not even know that they exist. And it's really shameful that not only that we have them, but the kind of people that they put there, kind of things that they do. Clearly, this guy pissed somebody off and he wound up in this black site prison. And he's probably wrongfully convicted. And our current FBI director, I believe, had a lot to do with that. So that's the second one. Let's get to the third article.
Okay, 1 second. Let me bring this up. Okay. Number 3. Here we go. All right.
Okay, so this is, if you scroll down, I believe this is a case out of Michigan. And guy's name is Kevin Tower. And he was convicted in 1996 of a 1995 double murder of his 2 uncles. And there's an enormous amount of evidence now that he's innocent. Also, the woman in the photo, her name is Lindy Morelli. She runs a good job. It's a nonprofit. She does wrongful convictions and other things, and she's blind also. She's absolute one of the coolest people I've ever met. But she introduced me to the case because she does a lot of things in prisons and eventually met Kevin and believed that he was innocent and has been lobbying on his behalf. So he's convicted of his 2 uncles' murders. Now, he definitely did what I'm about to say. Shortly before the murder, he forged his uncle's signature on one of his uncle's checks and stole from his uncle, I think, $600. He's been in jail since the 1990s. Obviously, that crime is long past, but it also raises suspicion. And obviously, there's no coincidences. However, I do believe that's an unfortunate coincidence. He was convicted once again by an informant. Her name is Becky Cochran. And just like in the other case, she has since recanted. And she says that she was pressured in the same way that Mr. Plant says he was, in a similar way, where she was in jail. She was like a drug addict. She's, I think, better now, but she was a drug addict and a prostitute at the time. And she was in jail for whatever, more recent crime that she had committed. And they basically, prosecutors came into her cell and said, if you don't play ball with us, you're going to spend a lot of time in jail. And she felt she had no choice but to testify that she was with Kevin in his car and she saw a bloody knife and placed him at the scene. The other thing is his uncles don't know if they were still they misspelled words.
It's getting a little bit scratchy again for some reason.
All right. Well, that might. Let's see if this will fix it.
Darn
All right.
technology. Okay.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
I don't know if we're going to have to do that a couple times. Hold on.
That's okay.
So there was a note found at the scene, and it was like something like "Gone fishing. See you Saturday," but the Saturday was spelled SATUREDEDAY. So they put an extra E in the middle. Whoever it was probably his uncles. When the cops picked up Kevin, they showed him the note and they said, write it what you wrote here. So he misspelled Saturday. And then they used it against him and said, well, how many people misspell Saturday? So he gets convicted, and his defense at trial was horrible, just awful. Several years later, it comes out that he has an airtight alibi. So I think that his uncle is left. It was either the 5th or the 6th of July. And the whole day he was with his sister. And they even have a receipt from the video store. And when the prosecution prosecuted the case, they said the murder happened later that day. And look, if somebody goes missing, and then you find them 4 months later, most likely they were murdered very, very soon after they went missing. It wasn't like they wandered off for 5 days, and then that's not likely to happen. So he had an alibi for that day. And the prosecution turns around and says, well, yeah, he could have been murdered on the 5th, but we didn't find the body until the 20th. And while it's more likely than not they were murdered on the 5th, they also could have been murdered anytime between the 5th and the 20th. And so the appeals court accepted that. And they even eventually hired one of the most well-renowned forensic pathologists who said, no, it was the 5th. Yeah, right there, July 5th, 1995. It wasn't any other time based on all of the evidence, but it's not enough. Werner Spitz, who did John F. Kennedy's autopsy, he knows what he's doing. He said, no, it's the 5th. It's not any, it's not likely than not it's the 5th, but it wasn't enough. And then after that, Becky says that she was pressured, and that's not enough. And so you basically, you have this case that's completely fallen apart, and he's still in jail. And in part, he's in jail because he didn't have a good enough attorney to, at trial, counter these arguments. There's no excuse for not being able to get that receipt. That receipt would have saved Kevin. It didn't, and now he's in jail for a very long time. And it's so hard to overturn a conviction. So that's something else that people should think about. So let's get the next article up.
4th one. Okay. Good. I think the thing, this is everybody's worst fear would be to be wrongfully convicted of something and then to have to serve time.
Something serious.
Yeah, and for something that that
wrongful conviction of a DUI, I think you'll recover. You might be mad, but you're not. Your life's not ruined if it's just a DUI. But yeah, no, a murder, a double murder. One other thing about Kevin's case, prosecution offered 20 years, and his attorney at the time recommended not taking him. Well, guess what? He'd be out of jail by now. Maybe he should have taken the 20 years. Okay, so this is an interesting case. We'll talk about just one of the cases, but the woman you're looking at, if you're watching this on video, her name is Anna Signicolazzi. She now has her own show called True Conviction, ironically enough. She used to be a heavy hitter prosecutor, undefeated in trials. Well, it turns out, why is she undefeated? Because she cheats. So her big case was called the Grid Kid Killer. It was a conviction in 2005. Basically, I'm not going to remember the guy's name. If you scroll down, I think you're going to see it. This guy was a college football player at a college in Connecticut. He went out, met a few girls. They eventually introduced him to a couple. Can you keep scrolling down, because I'm having trouble remembering everybody's name. I remember the case, but the names are like they're not crossing my mind. The girls meet a couple of guys. They wind up back at a house party. And later that night, this guy gets murdered, gets shot, and John Juca. So they meet a guy named John Juca, and Mark Fisher is the kid who died. John Juca, they meet him. They wind up going back to his house, and then later on, Fisher is murdered, not at Juca's house, but near it, like a few blocks away. And another guy is the murderer. And what happens is that guy points the finger at Juca. Russo is the guy's last name, and says Juca put him up to it, that we're like wannabe gangbangers. All of it is actually nonsense. So this lady Nicolazzi, she did several things. First of all, during her closing arguments, she suggested that Juca may be the actual murderer, which was facts that were not introduced, a big no-no, very unethical. And since she is the prosecutor, what happens is the prosecutor goes, then the defense goes, then the prosecutor goes against. So she was able to throw that at the jury without the defense being able to counteract it, because she was the last person to testify. The other thing is, once again, just as we saw in the case with Chris Ray, in this other case, witnesses were threatened. So witnesses that came forward to implicate Juca in one way or another have since put out affidavits that say that they were threatened by Nicolazzi. The other thing is, I don't know if it was, oh no, it was another guy that testified. Oh, there's a jailhouse informant that testified, and she misled the defense about how much she, her office that is, was helping this guy. Avellino was his name. On top of that, one of the jurors failed to mention that he knew some of the people involved, that he believed Juka was a Jew and he didn't like him, and he wanted him found guilty. This came out later when Doreen Giuliano, John's mom, went undercover and then became the guy's girlfriend and got him on audio. And all of that has come out, and for whatever reason, appeals court after appeals court after appeals court will refuse to overturn the conviction. John sits in jail. There's juror misconduct. There's prosecutorial misconduct. Witnesses have been lying, and it's still not enough. And there are other cases that have been found that involve Anna Nicolazzi. She was 35-0 because she cheated, and she was rewarded with a nice fat TV show on Investigation Discovery. So why do they do this? Well, look, her career is all set. So she commits prosecutorial misconduct. And look, she left the DA's office right when the heat got too hot. One other thing, and I put it at the end of the case, of the story, she worked primarily for a district attorney named Charles Hines, I think is his last name. And I think at the time I did this article, they had already overturned 20 of his convictions, which is an enormous amount. Brooklyn, where this guy was the DA, was the primary spot for a very corrupt cop named Louis Scarcella, who I think they've overturned about 20 convictions that involved his investigation. This is one of the, there's been a lot of corrupt cops in New York, so I won't say he's the most corrupt cop they've ever had, but he's a pretty corrupt cop. So that area between Hines, Nicolazzi, and Scarcella, it's a lot of convictions that they're going to be overturning. And these are all things that happened 20, 25, 30 years ago, and you have to clean it up many years later. You can't clean it up because you're never going to give those people their time back. But there's a lot of people sitting in jail in the Brooklyn area that were convicted by Nicolazzi, Hines, and Scarcella, and they're innocent. So this is only the beginning of the story. This is a big case. 2020, among others, has covered it. It's received a lot of publicity. And in fact, an appeals court at one point did overturn the conviction, but then they kept him in jail while the prosecution appealed that. And then the overturn was overturned, if you can understand what I mean. And he's back at square one. And I forgot to mention, also, she withheld Nicolazzi's exculpatory evidence, another Brady violation, very serious. If you can go up to the section where it's Mark Betterow, that's his attorney. He discovered this. A jailhouse informant did an interview with her, and the jailhouse informant told her that one, Juka told him that he had nothing to do with it, and Russo told him that Juka had nothing to do with it. And what she did was she withheld the audio, and then I don't know what the guy's name was, but she misspelled the guy's name on the witness list, so she misled people about who he was, and as a result, the defense didn't discover this guy existed until he died. And so Nicolazzi, just in this one case, threatened witnesses, made a misstatement in her closing argument, and withheld evidence.
Oh my goodness.
And it's all good because she has a nice TV show on Investigation Discovery. John Juka is sitting in jail for almost 20 years. Who knows how many other guys like him?
It's amazing too that she's rewarded for it. She's given.
Yeah. Well, rewarded for it because she was 35-0. She won. What is it? The ends justify the means.
Right.
And look, this is part of the problem DAs, and look, we elect DAs. So this is on the voters in a sense. DAs value convictions. So it's not that they encourage you to be unethical. It's just they don't place much of an emphasis on ethics. And the reason is because the voters, want convictions. So as a result, ethics get bypassed, and you have people like Anna Signicolazzi, who's extremely unethical, and then she's rewarded because she wins. Well, yeah, look, if you cheat, it's much easier to win.
Period.
Okay. So let's go to the next one. We got, and I did sort of like a social experiment. I started speaking with a Michigan prisoner named Terrence Moore, and before I knew it, he gave me 3 referrals of prisoners that he believed were innocent. And he was not, by the way. Terrence Moore called him one bad hombre. But I just found it fascinating that this like career criminal is giving me referrals, and I thought, well, it would just be interesting to find out, are they all innocent and he's just full of crap because criminals are full of crap? Are they all innocent because a career criminal in prison would know, or maybe something in between? And he was mostly right. A lot of the stuff I'm talking about are from Michigan, and that's because it started with him. And I believe this guy, Robert Reynolds, is one of them. And yeah, Lakeland Correctional Facility. And by the way, that's also where Kevin Tower is at. Though Kevin, his story I knew about before this. But Kevin, ironically enough, did not give me any referrals. It was just this guy, Terrence Moore. And I'm trying to remember, I think, no, keep scrolling down. I think Reynolds' case, if I'm not mistaken, it was done entirely. Yeah, so Robert Reynolds, the way he got convicted, it's really disappointing. He was convicted entirely because 3 people who had been caught with drugs said he was their like supplier, and they got that's exact. In fact, it's the exact same numbers in Chuck's case. But what's stunning to me is, number one, how easy it is to get a conviction that way, and how often people are willing to do a deal like that, where you testify against someone, you get a resistance, and here's the thing, particularly in Chuck's case, I don't know if it came out in this case, but most of the prosecution has to disclose that they made a deal. I know in Chuck's case, and I read it in the transcript, there's a pretty dramatic part where Chuck's attorney says to LeBou, were you charged with this crime? No. Were you charged with this crime? No. And he went crime by crime by crime. And he goes, you got a pretty good deal, didn't you? And so the jury knew full well in Chuck Panici's case, that's Chuck I'm talking about, that the star witness, that all of the witnesses are here as part of a deal. And that was okay with them. Because look, to me, that's bribery. If you're facing 20 years, but in exchange for testifying, you get 2 years, how is that different than getting $50,000? It's more than $50,000. So let me look it up. I want to make sure I got this right. But I believe Robert Reynolds' case, it was 3 people who were caught with drugs, and as a result, he was convicted because they turned around and they testified against him because they said, well, we're the small time either dealers or we're just the users. The dealer is this guy. And now he's sitting in jail, and he'll be there for a while because I believe he does have a criminal record. But yeah, and so yeah, here's what I wrote. First, he said he was convicted on the testimony of 3 people who were given deals and immunity for their testimony. That's what I wrote in the article. They got deals. They didn't have the drugs on them. They didn't do an undercover sting. None of that. These people got on the stand and they said, he's our supplier. And presumably, because they heard it from 3 different people, the jury thought, well, they can't all be lying. Yeah, no, they can. They absolutely can. There's no reason, if you're on a jury, to believe anything that anyone says. If you hear, I committed this crime, and as a result of my cooperation, I received a much smaller sentence than I would have if I didn't cooperate. The prosecution says we want to encourage cooperation, which is just a nice way of saying that we bribe witnesses. So he's in jail, and there's this photo, strictly because 3 people who were caught with drugs, they were caught with drugs, said he was their supplier. So that's Robert Reynolds. And then we've got one more, I think.
Yes. Gosh, that's so
Okay,
sad.
and let me,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
What were you going to say?
This was, I think I did okay. Oh, this is quite the case. This next case involves a tainted lineup. And so before I start, one of the many problems with our criminal justice systems, lots of lineups are tainted for a variety of reasons. And so what happens is somebody picks somebody out of a lineup, and then you're on the jury and you're like, oh, well, that's really strong evidence. You picked them out of a lineup. It's not as strong as you think once you see how often they're tainted. So let me make sure I get this right. And so he the lineup consisted of 7 men. All 6 of the men besides me had very short hair and or bald, while I was the one person in the lineup with an afro, long style hair, and of course that's how they remembered the. So go figure. They picked him out of that lineup. Isn't that nice? That might be because they tainted. And look, most of the time that's not a mistake. If they pick everyone with one style of hair and you have the other, that's because they're like subtly hinting to the witness, who they want you to pick. And so once you have the tainted lineup, then from there it's very easy. The witness, this is from my order. The witnesses were told that the suspect was in the lineup, and say we were looking with someone with an afro. It wasn't hard to pick out. The 2 witnesses also testified that I was the only man in the lineup with long hair, and that helped them pick me out. And here's something interesting. I once interviewed a guy named Jeff Deskowick, who is wrongfully convicted and exonerated, and he does a lot of work now on wrongful convictions. And he says eyewitness testimony is the worst form of evidence, that eyewitnesses, particularly when they're picking out someone they didn't know before the crime, are very often wrong. And yet again, see if this is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. So they very often pick out the wrong person. And once again, when you're on a jury and, eyewitness comes in, he's the murderer or she's the murderer, she's the robber, he's the robber. You consider that really strong evidence. It's not nearly as strong as you think it is. If you're on a jury, do critical thinking. I've been on 2 juries. It does suck. It's every bit in some ways as bad as people claim it is. And I did a civil case that was just boring. It's just horribly boring. I did a murder case that was like more compelling, but I did, meaning I was on a jury. But you don't have to do it all that often. Take your time. The decision you're making is very significant, and use critical thinking. If all you've got is an eyewitness, that's really not an awful lot of evidence. How come that's all you have? If this guy picked them out, if he's really the perpetrator, how come they didn't find any other evidence? If he really is the perpetrator, there's an eyewitness, but for some reason they didn't find anything else. That doesn't seem to make sense. And so, right. And he, look, basically, I think, look, he was convicted largely on the strength of this of this tainted lineup that should have been and look, once again, there was a lawyer who witnessed the lineup, who objected, and his attorney at trial did a terrible job, should have kept the lineup out. And once again, it was poor, it was borderline malpractice, and what in legal sense, ineffective counsel. And, if Drew had O.J. Simpson money, he wouldn't be in jail. But that's the thing. These tricks, these gimmicks, these techniques, they will work against someone who doesn't have the resources to fight back. That's why the criminal justice system primarily targets minorities, because those are the people that are right now to work. You can't hear me?
It's getting fuzzy again a little bit.
All right. Let me go back to the other way. So, and
This happens to me sometimes too.
I think that's almost. If you got anything else you want to add,
This, what was that?
I think that's all of the cases. So between all of those, prosecutorial misconduct is common. Juror misconduct a lot more common than we realize.
So fuzzy.
My friend, sure, it's getting fuzzy.
Yeah, it's still fuzzy for some reason.
I think we're just my question was the Vanderbilt rates. You can look it up. There's a bunch of lawyers who gang raped a woman and filmed it. It was pretty awful. But he was able to get the guy off. They were found guilty, and there was 2 trials. He did the first trial because after the fact, he found out that one of the jurors lied and forgot to tell during the questionnaire that they were the victim of a sexual crime. Obviously, if you're the victim of sexual assault, you can't be on the jury, or someone's accused of rape. So that was juror misconduct. It's a lot more common than you think it is. Most people don't want to be on juries. Some people, for whatever reason, do when they shouldn't. It's a lot more common than you think it is, as in John Juka's case. Prosecutorial misconduct is very common. Juror misconduct is very common. Juries not doing their job is a lot more common than you think it is. And lawyers who defend the defendants not doing a good job is extremely common. As a result, I do think that we have something like a crisis in our jails. And look, we jail more per capita, not just raw numbers, per capita than anyone in the world. And I think part of that is a lot of wrongfully convicted people. It's really hard to get that undone. Jeff did. You can look up his story. His is horrible. A classmate was raped and murdered. He confessed, but that was after like 16 hours, and he was 16. His mom wasn't there, and they coerced, pressured. And confessions, well, he confessed. He must have done it. You don't know what happened before the confession. They will coerce, they'll cajole, they'll lie to you oftentimes. And then you have the confession. If that's all they have, you've got to wonder, like, if the person is guilty, how come all the evidence is centered on one thing? They're guilty, they actually did it. You would think there'd be a lot of different evidence.
What are the monetary benefits of somebody being wrongfully convicted?
The monetary benefits are, well, if you are exonerated, you will get millions because it's per year that you spend in jail. Jeff, I think, got like $25-30 million. You'll get a lot of money. It's not worth the time you lose. The monetary benefits, well, let's talk about them.
What about also on the court's end too? Like, what's their
winning? The monetary benefit is these prosecutors are judged by their conviction record. So it's career advancement, especially in high profile cases. That grid kit killer was a high profile case. In Chuck's case, Chris Gear was the prosecutor. He's now in private practice. If you can go GAIR. I haven't checked it in a while, but he still lists in his bio, I convicted Chuck Panici. He makes millions now as a private lawyer. That's a selling point. There's not necessarily a direct link, but there's clearly an indirect link in the sense that this kind of success brings you career success. All of these prosecutors, they want to move up. A lot of them have an eye on being a top flight criminal defense attorney. I'm going to do this for a few years and I'm going to make some real money. You want to have convictions, particularly in high profile cases, because then when you're meeting with a potential client, oh, you convicted so-and-so, that's a case everyone knows. You convicted so-and-so. It's in a sense no different than Johnny Depp's lawyers. You think they're in demand, they might be a little bit in demand. So they didn't do anything unethical, but you win a case like that and you become a lot more high profile. A lot of people know who you are and your career advances. Chris Guerra absolutely used it for career advancement. Anna Signicolazzi, no doubt. She became, I think, the head, I don't remember, of a unit inside. And then as soon as, look, that 35-0 is what got her the ID show. You look at all of this, look, sometimes it's just to keep your job. Maybe you've been losing a little bit. You need a win or they're going to fire you. There's all sorts of things. It's, I think, somewhat indirect, but it's absolutely a financial gain. Everyone who gets a conviction, they benefit from it financially. That's why they do it. And it's because as a society, and then from the top down in the offices, that's what they value, not ethics, not doing it the right way, not justice. They value convictions, ordeals. They value cases cleared where you got them to plead to a guilty, to something guilty, whether pled guilty or guilty verdict. They value that, and everyone knows it, and that's why these people cheat. Anna Signicolazzi didn't cheat because she just firmly believed everyone was guilty, and she just by hook or crook she was going to put the guilty person in jail. She did it because it advanced her career, and that because as soon as the heat got hot, she got out of there and got a cushy job as a TV host. And some of them that may be like their long term. A lot of them want to be on TV later. How do you get on TV if you were the winner in a high profile case? So no one knows if you withhold evidence. We know when it gets discovered, and it does get discovered, but it's often sloppiness. In Nicolazzi's case, so she withheld this recording, and Betteroff, who was John's attorney, the way he explained it to me was he came in and he essentially bullied some clerk in the prosecutor's office. He's like, I know you have more. It's here. I want everything. And the lady got so flustered that she went in the back and put a bunch of stuff into a box. And in the box was this recording. So, sort of by accident. And, Nicolazzi foolishly kept the recording. Should have just destroyed it. But usually if you're withholding evidence, it's hard to find that. So, you get the conviction, you raise your profile, you become a TV host, you become a high profile criminal defense attorney, maybe you become a politician. Rudy Giuliani was a high powered prosecutor, not that he did anything wrong, and look, same thing. That's another reason why, especially in the high profile cases, Giuliani made his name originally by the Mafia Commission trial, which is one of the most high profile trials ever. So that's how people knew his name. So if you're taking on the grid kid killer, you can't have that turn out not guilty, because then you're the one who lost the grid kid killer. You remember the OJ trial? Well, guess what? The prosecutors didn't have much of a career afterwards. You lose the OJ trial, and it ends it for you. The defense attorneys, they were already famous. None of them made their careers. They'd already made their careers. They made their careers, and as a result, OJ chose them. But that's another reason why, especially the high profile ones, you really want to scrutinize them, because those are especially the ones where there's going to be malfeasance. And on both sides, don't think criminal defense attorneys. I wrote a book that involved a murder with an extremely unethical criminal defense attorney who would bribe people to become witnesses. And all of a sudden you need an alibi and a witness steps forward. And it was bribe. He would give them money. That's why they step forward, or he'd squeeze them or do some other thing. He was extremely unethical. And that's how he won acquittals. including for a lot of bad people, because he did a lot of murder trials. It's even worse when a criminal defense attorney does it. But don't think this is just a prosecutor thing. There's plenty of unethical criminal defense attorneys who will use tricks as well. And that's not to say there's also a lot more honest ones on both ends who just make good arguments, do their work. And I wish, look, I don't know, lawyers, it's about knowing the law, about making the right argument. I wish that lawyers would just do that. I don't know why they turn it into what they turn it into. Most law is about who you know and the right connections and pulling the right button, and it has nothing to do with the actual law. It's just something completely different, and it's really unfortunate. I don't know why there's so many unethical lawyers. The law is complex. Making an argument is complex. It's very hard work. You should be paid a lot. I don't know why they don't all focus on that. But as far as wrongful convictions, a lot of that stuff happens. It happens through juror misconduct, prosecutorial misconduct, juries not doing their job, and ineffective counsel. And look, and sometimes witnesses also lie, not because a prosecutor put them up to it, because they don't like someone and they lie for a variety of reasons as well. So if you're on the jury, critical thinking, think about the evidence. Is it really as strong as you think it is? Is it really as weak as you think it is? Take your time. You only do it once. And I think a lot of this stuff will be solved if jurors really think through things. There's no reason Chuck should have been convicted. There's really no evidence. Evidence is 3 people who took deals saying he did it. Big deal. It's nothing, zero. You take that away, there's nothing. There's nothing on his tax returns. There's no paper trail to anything. It's all these people saying it. Even with Kevin Tower, I don't, a witness saying she saw a knife. The check was kind of strong evidence, but that's, is that guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? I don't know. A lot of these should have been resolved by the jury doing a good job. And so when you're on the jury, think about what I said, and hopefully you'll do a better job.
Have you ever heard of juries being paid off or bribed? Is that something that happens also?
Of course, mostly by mafia. Al Capone used to do that. That's how he got off all the time. John Gotti, he was acquitted twice. In fact, I got a great story. And judges, yes. But usually it's gangsters, because the thing about bribing a jury, even if you want to, it's really hard. Al Capone had the resources to do it. John Gotti had the resources to do it. The thing about bribing a jury is the punishment for that is relatively small. So you get off on the actual crime, and then you face the tampering with a jury trial charge. So there's a guy named Harry Alleman, and he is the only person in the history of America to be tried for the same crime twice. So you're saying, no, that's impossible. You can't. It's in the Constitution, right? Well, in this case, the prosecutors went to an appeals court and said, through proof, it was a bench trial, meaning they didn't want a jury, and you'll find out why. The judge's last name is Mahoney. He was bribed. So the prosecutors argued effectively there was no single jeopardy. Since you bribed the judge, you knew the outcome, and the appeals court agreed and said, no, this is not a case of double jeopardy, because you actually bribed the judge, and they did convict him a second time. But that happened in Cook County. There's a lot of, especially judicial bribery. Yes, it happens. I think that's harder to do just because it's hard to do. Gangsters will do it in gangster trials. If you hear of a gangster getting off, and there seem to be a lot of evidence, that's one you're probably thinking is a good chance there was some bribery going on with jurors. Yeah, look, it happens. It probably happened more 100 years ago, but yeah, look, it's a historical fact. That's how Al Capone used to get off. I don't think him, but for his people, they'd absolutely figure out, because Capone bribed everyone. Capone bribed the mayor, he bribed cops, he bribed everyone. So he had people inside the courts he was bribing, so they would give him the jury list, so he'd know who was on the jury. And so that's how he would bribe the jury. But yeah, look, it's hard to know who the jurors are. That's complex, but gangsters are able to do it. So it happens, I would say, mostly with them and judges. And that happens a lot more than people think. The jurors, not nearly as much, I think, as judges. Being
Interesting.
bribed, I mean.
Yeah. It's interesting to me just learning about these different aspects of the court, whether it's family court, whether it is, convictions of a crime, criminal court, just the similarities between how totally different systems are run very similarly, and the basis of it is money.
The criminal courts, like the rules of evidence are a lot better, even in tainted trials. You don't have like what you have in family court where one side presents evidence and on the other side doesn't at all. Judges are able to steer it by what they do and don't allow into evidence. But more than that I think the problem is that people have a perverted view of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That's supposed to be a pretty high standard. If all you got to do is convince 2 or 3 people to point the finger at someone and convince them through a deal, and that's all, and that's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, you can have all the rules of everything can be presented fairly and honestly. If all it takes is for the jury to hear 3 people who got a deal say he did it, and that's it, and there's nothing else, and that's enough for a jury, then you can have a fair trial and the judge can do nothing wrong. And the prosecutors did wrong, and it's hard. As I said, in Chuck's case, they got it out that these guys got deals, but still the jury didn't care. I don't understand how you cannot care. You hear a guy that's basically being bribed, and that's all the evidence you have. That's not strong at all. That's a really weak case. There's no reason for a jury to hear a couple people getting deals, pointing the finger at someone and saying that's enough for guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The most notorious of those is Sammy the Bull Gravano, who then testified against Gotti. Now, I actually read, I don't believe his testimony swayed anyone. They also had Gotti on tape, but he admitted to 19 murders and he did 5 years in jail. He wound up doing more for another set of crimes. But how can you, I hope that when they heard him speak, they completely dismissed everything he said, because if you admit to 19 murders and you get 5 years, then you'll say anything. So that's the most notorious deal, and it's still controversial because you got Gotti, but you forgave 19 murders. And by the way, one of the murders was his brother-in-law, the brother of his wife. He killed the brother of his wife. He was like a drug addict. He was causing the mafia problems, and in their world, it doesn't matter. But he did kill his brother's wife. That's how cold-blooded he is, or was. I think he's more, toned down now. Now he's a YouTuber, go figure. Now he just tells stories about himself. And he sort of makes a living more honestly. But they make deals with a lot of, look, that's another thing. I didn't speak to him, but by email, I communicated with a guy named Michael Franzese, who is a former gangster who's now a born-again Christian. He knew all those. He was a very successful gangster. He said, believe me, Sammy was far more dangerous. John, he thumbed his nose at the government, so they wanted to take him down. But you took down the guy with the high profile, but you gave, but the other guys committed 19 murders and you let him off after 5 years. And then what happened? Sammy the Bull went to Arizona and started an ecstasy ring. So, did you solve crime? No, because you let off the guy who could be in jail for life, and then he got out and he started an ecstasy ring. So, but they make deals all the time, and people accept that like it's it's just a part of the system. Well, no, it's a part of the system because we allow it to be. If juries dismissed that evidence every time, they would stop making deals.
What would you say? Maybe there's no good answer to this, but what should somebody do if they're ever in that position where they're given a bribe or they can plead not guilty?
I'm not going to tell you what to do. The prosecution had, hopefully you'll do the right
Anything like
thing.
work? Have you seen people get out of this in some way or any type of strategy?
People have gotten out of this, but a lot less than people who haven't. Prosecutors have an unlimited amount of resources, money, everything. They want to get you, they'll get you. There's no question about it. I once heard a guy named Joe Nacho speak, and he used to be the CEO of Quest, and he thumbed his nose. I won't say how, but he did. He thumbed sort of. He was working with the government. They liked what Quest was doing. Quest was doing a lot of like fiber optics. They wanted that same kind of technology. And then all of a sudden one day, he didn't thumb his nose. And I'll tell you what he did. They came to him and they said, we want like all of this data from all your customers. He goes, really? Why don't you give me the like legal reasoning behind how I'm supposed to give you all of this data for every single one of my customers? And by the way, he was very clear on this, that happened in May of 2001. This wasn't a response to 9/11. This was pre 9/11. And then before he knows it, he's being insider trading. And it was a ridiculous charge because he was told he was going to lose contracts. He already started selling his stocks. And then he was going to told, because they said, you knew you were going to lose contracts, so that's why you were selling your stocks. He was not allowed to put this evidence on, they claimed, because it was a matter of national security. So they basically manipulated the trial so they'd find him guilty. So
Wow.
and he did several years in jail, but he wrote a book about it. But if they want to get you, they'll get you. There's nothing you can do. There's not nothing, but it's hard. So you should do the right thing. But look, when the government starts putting pressure on you, this happened many years ago with the Red Scare and all of like the movie people. And you should read like what they did to force these actors and directors to talk. It's really easy to sit back and say you shouldn't ever rat on your friends. Ilya Kazan, who directed a lot of people, James Dean, Marlon Brando, a lot of other people, was very controversial in Hollywood because he was a cooperating witness, but they will put an enormous amount of pressure on you. They'll destroy your life. So it's easy to say you'll do the right thing, but the pressure that's ratcheted up is very difficult. I won't tell you what to do. Hopefully you'll do the right thing, but it's hard. It's very hard.
I can't even imagine. Even in, family court, you see that happening with, mothers or fathers who have some truth that they're trying to get across, that their child's being abused, and they're offered that collateral of, if you shut up, we'll let you see your children. Just drop it, pretend it didn't happen, say that you lied, say that it's not true, then we'll give you this. Or you're going to see
don't go to the media, or don't go to the media. That's how they shut them up often. We'll let you have this kind of custody visitation, but you can't go to the media because that's not in the best interest of your children. Of course, courts, lawyers have all sorts of levers they can pull. It's really difficult. One of the guys that testified against Chuck, I'm not going to remember his name, but he was the mayor of, I think they call it South Chicago Heights. So Chicago Heights is like the big town, and then South Chicago Heights is the really small town. And that guy was in jail for whatever thing they did. And they just said, how many more years do you want to do? Is it these very few years or a lot of years? Because if it's very few, you're going to tell us that Chuck gave you a bribe. If it's a lot, then no. And so he went, okay, I'll talk about one. He basically they already had him. He was already broken. And Chuck told me a story. Chicago Heights had this like drug kingpin, and he had gotten busted. He was in jail, and Chuck saw him, and they started talking. And the guy said, you should be thanking me. Chuck said, really? Why should I be thanking you? He goes, because the feds came to me and they said they wanted me to point the finger at you, and I wouldn't do it. So you can see how hard the feds went at him. And by the way, I remembered the mobster who ran Chicago Heights. His name was Albert Taco. He was a pretty notorious. He's one of the, like, besides Al Capone, he's probably the most notorious mobster in the Chicago area. And as I said, Chuck and Albert grew up a block and a half away from each other. And by the way, on the same street was a guy named Jerry Colangelo, who used to own the Phoenix Suns, the Arizona Diamondbacks. In fact, Chuck was very good friends with Jerry. Some people said Chuck was his mentor, Jerry's. Chuck said no. In fact, I'll give you the quote. Jerry was going to make it with or without me. I had nothing to do with that. Jerry was going to make it. But they were friends. But these three, like, very well-known people, all lived within a block and a half of each other in Chicago Heights. But getting back to my original point, they will pull, and if they want to get you, they will pull any lever. As I said, they went after even the drug kingpin. Tell on Chuck and we'll give you a deal. It's basically like either the reward or the punishment. Do you want to go home right away, or do you want a long prison sentence? And it's very hard to do the right thing. And then look, you do the right thing and you're in jail for a really long time. You feel, I don't know how you feel because you're in jail for a very long time.
Yeah, and then your story is buried for that entire time. By the time you get out, people forget about it. It's irrelevant and it's just still brushed under the rug,
Right. You did the right thing, but no one knows.
What else do you think? Jury's doing the right thing. Obviously, we need better people stepping into positions in law, such as judges, lawyers.
Well, number one, I think voters need to demand ethical prosecutors, which means that you're voting for DAs who focus on ethics, who talk about ethics, who demand good ethics, because you are putting the DA, the district attorney, that's the DA, they're in office. It's all corporate culture. If the DA is focusing on ethics, you're going to have, not everyone, there's too many prosecutors in the office for every single person going lockstep, but most will be ethical then. If you're like convictions, well, they'll get you a lot of convictions. They won't care about ethics that much. If the public, they want the tough on crime, you all want a guy who's tough on crime. Well, guess what? If all you're saying is tough on crime, they're not really worried about ethics because that's not what you're focused on. People have to vote in the right person. They have to focus on the right thing. And look, we most of us don't even know who the DA is. Let's face it. You're not even really thinking about it. It's not an election that you consider. So there's a lot of other problems. Yeah, look, juries, most of them, it's not malfeasance. There is some juror misconduct. It's more, they're not really thinking through the evidence. How do you, some of these cases, I just don't understand how you could have gone back into that jury room and really thought that was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Certainly in Chuck's case, completely ridiculous. Okay, Robert Reynolds, that's absurd. 3 people who all got deals say you did it. So what? It's nothing. It's zero. It's almost zero. But still, they're all convicted. A lot of people get convicted. And when you look at that evidence, it becomes terrifying. It's very easy to get that drummed up. So that, and look, the main one is prosecutorial misconduct. They will coerce witnesses. They will suborn perjury. They will mislead. They will withhold evidence. And it's not all of them. It's certainly not the majority of them. But even one can do a lot of damage. I don't think it's one. And as I said, it's the DAs and their emphasis. It filters down. I talked with not a lot, but a few criminal defense attorneys, and the reactions are varied. But there's not one criminal defense attorney who said they've never run into a case where there's been a Brady violation, which is where the prosecutor withholds exculpatory evidence. So all of them have at least seen it. Some of them say it's at like an alarming rate. Others say, I've seen it, pretty rare. And it also depends. Like in Michigan, they were telling me it's not that common. In New York, they're like, oh my God, it's out of control. They're all withholding evidence. So I think it depends on the areas. But prosecutorial misconduct is really the biggest problem.
Gosh. Well, this is so enlightening. And it's, these issues, whether it is family court, criminal court, I know for me personally, it's been one of the most eye-opening parts of this whole journey and learning about corruption across the world, learning that these systems that I grew up thinking that I can trust because there's not corruption within them. There's corruption outside of it that they give justice to.
I can tell you this, the real criminal justice system is nothing like Law and Order. And, you know, that shows, I don't know, a lot of people view our like courts through the prism of that show because it's so popular and there's so many episodes. It's nothing like that, almost nothing. It's not like SVU. It's not like any of those shows. It's completely different. You know, the prosecutors are a lot more ruthless. You know, they're not like Jack McCoy at all. You know, he'd be ruthless every once in a while. And then even then he made it seem noble. They're not noble like that. Not as much as you think they are. Look, these, the prosecutors, some of them did get into it because they wanted to put the bad guys away. There are those prosecutors, they did it for the right reasons. Some of them did it because they see this career advancement, who knows what, a pension. They see some other future opportunity, and being ethical and whatever future goals they have is that they're not necessarily congruent. And it's unfortunate. Look, this happens a lot because these prosecutors, they have future goals. And, you know, Nicolasi still has her show. I've sent ID multiple emails about it. They don't care. They do not care that a show called True Conviction is run by someone who cheated for who knows how many of our convictions. They don't care. She's been rewarded. You know, the stories are out there. They hang over her head to some degree. They've received some media attention. I don't know how the ratings on the show are, but she hasn't suffered at all. Zero, not at all. She advanced through the ranks in the DA's office. She became a star, and now she's a star, you know, I guess literally on TV.
Yeah. And, you know, you see what we're told something should be versus what it is. And I can see why so many people struggle with wrapping their mind around it and saying that's just a conspiracy, that could never happen. Because it goes literally against everything that we've known since childhood, watching court cases or, you know, even in cartoons.
Perry Mason? Perry, what? On what? Perry Mason, Law and Order?
Yeah.
Really. You know, one of the many benefits of the, and I think there were a lot of benefits of the death heard trial, is you saw an actual trial. People think they know how court goes. It's not anything like you think it is. It's a lot different. So people have this view of court that's not real. So people, they have a perverted view, but we're all potential jurors as long as you're eligible to vote, as long as you're eligible and signed up. So this is a topic for everyone, because when you're on a jury, you should be considering all of these things. You should hold the prosecution to its burden, because that's what makes our system go, is that each and every time, in order to earn a conviction, you have proven guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. You know, that same thing with the OJ trial. You may think he's guilty, but the prosecution didn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. They didn't even come close. They may have come close, but not really. The jury got the verdict right, even if he's guilty, and most certainly he probably is. But you know what? The prosecutors did a terrible job. The defense attorneys did a better job, and that's how it goes. And every time, that's what you have to do. You have to hold them to that standard, because that's the standard we have. It's not about whether you think someone's guilty. See, a lot of people, now it's almost 30 years old, but a lot of people, they questioned the jury and they said, you know, you found OJ innocent or not guilty because he's OJ. He's a big deal. There was a lot of blacks on the jury. It must have been a racial thing. But keep in mind, the lead detective had to plead the fifth when he was testifying. They ran circles around him. That's enough right there. If the lead detective is pleading the fifth and he's saying things that aren't true, how can you trust any of the rest of the evidence? It doesn't matter what the rest of the evidence is. Right there, you've got enough that you can doubt that any of the rest of the evidence was gotten fairly. He's put enough doubt. It's reasonable doubt. They did the right thing. They found him not guilty in like a half hour. That was wrong. They should have taken their time. It was a very long trial. But that's a case where they held the prosecution to its burden. And you should hold them to their burden every time. So that's something to think about if and when you are chosen to be a juror.
And I think too, just learning this, even if you don't sit on a jury, we're constantly faced, like you just said, the Depp Heard trial. We're constantly exposed to trials and, we trust just what's on TV without asking any questions about it or being our own jury outside of the court, and saying, hey, what evidence was presented to me? What do I think, despite what the verdict was,
In the thing about the Depp Heard trial was you didn't have to do that because they broadcast the entire trial gavel to gavel.
Which is so crazy, but not the Ghislaine Maxwell trial.
Well, yeah, but they don't do federal trials. Don't have cameras. That's not necessarily number one. The two, just because they didn't in Maxwell doesn't mean they shouldn't have in Johnny Depp. They did it because a media asked, and I don't know if any media asked either. In Ghislaine Maxwell's, a media asked, and the judge said, well, there's a lot of interest, so it's better that we have a camera than the media write what they want. It's better that the public just sees it all. And look, it captivated the public. There's a lot of reasons for that, but the public got to see a full trial. I think that was good. That was good. Sometime, OJ, by the way, OJ was broadcast gavel to gavel as well. Everyone saw every part of it. So that captivated the public in a different way. I didn't think there would ever be a trial that created more publicity than OJ, but that Heard, if it didn't, it's really close. A lot closer than I ever thought any other trial would. But getting back again, like that, those are two times where you actually see a real trial, and so you understand how courts actually work. People don't understand how courts work, and that's why one reason why they don't believe there's a lot of wrongful convictions. They don't think that you'd never cover up abuse in child custody. That would never happen. Why would a court ever give a known abuser custody? You're just talking out your butt. That would never happen. No, it would. It's because you don't know how these trials go. You don't know how these court cases go. But social media is helping with that because a lot more of it is getting out. Because a lot more of it, technology in itself, because it's easy to record them, not necessarily even surreptitiously. Courts record themselves because it's easy now. It's better to just have an audio recording, and then it's easy to get the audio recording, and it's easy to put it on YouTube or BitChute or Rumble or all of them, or turn it into a podcast. So that's getting out. If you don't believe me, go to YouTube and into the search bar, do court proceedings and see how much comes up. Do child custody proceedings, see how much comes up. Criminal court proceedings, see how much comes up. A lot. Thousands and thousands and thousands of videos all over the place. They're being put online. So I do think in that respect, it's getting better. We'll see. Wrongful convictions does get some publicity. It's usually an individual case. Kim Kardashian in particular, she championed a guy named Rodney Reed, and it wasn't just her, but her being a celebrity drew a lot of media. Oprah got involved, and he's so wrongfully convicted. It's just ridiculous. I won't go through all of the evidence, but it's clear he's wrongfully convicted. But so that case drew a lot of attention, but like the topic doesn't. It doesn't get covered on a somewhat regular basis. People aren't like talking about criminal cases with potential wrongful convictions. There are like shows that talk about criminal cases, and that might help. But that's it. I don't know if it's more or less really than family court. It's definitely not enough. When I spoke to Jeff, he said one thing he said is the media likes to wait until you've been exonerated before they write about it. You're like, well, what do I need you for if I'm already exonerated? They don't want to stick their necks out. They don't want to talk about someone who's wrongfully convicted based on the evidence. They want a judge to say he's wrongfully convicted, and then they'll write about it. Well, then we don't need you, number one. Number two, that happens very little. We need the coverage for a lot of these cases. There's nothing wrong about talking about a guy who was convicted, even though he hasn't been exonerated, because a 21-year-old testified about things that happened to her when she's 5. People should know that this happens, because people are probably shocked that someone could get convicted based on that.
Yeah, I'm so grateful that there's people like you out there just bringing attention to some of this, because like I said, so many of us are we blindly just watch and listen to what we hear and see and take it for fact and don't think about it ever again. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about or anything else that you want to close with?
I think that's it. We've
Yeah.
gone for a good long while.
Yeah. Where can people find you online? I know we talk about this every time, but I like to
Hopefully-
remind people.
Hopefully put it into the description, but it's michaelvolpe.substack.com.
Okay. And you're on
Most
Twitter.
of these articles are there. The one about Nicolazzi I wrote for the Daily Caller, another one I put on the blog that I used to have. But most of these are there, particularly the stuff with Randall Rahr, who I'm talking to semi-regularly through JPay, they call it, through like their email system. So there might be some new articles by the time you look me up. And he's got a really interesting case. If everything he's saying is true, it's pretty extraordinary, because not only does he have evidence of system-wide corruption, but they targeted him because he has evidence of system-wide corruption, which is pretty significant.
Well, I'll put all of the articles that you sent me in the show notes. And I know one of them does have a paywall. I encourage people to please go support Mike. The work that he's doing is important. And it's really affordable. You get so much. He's constantly putting stuff out. I'm always getting emails almost daily of content. So you definitely get your money's worth. You learn a lot about all different aspects.
Required to read any of it. So, so
Yeah.
don't feel obliged. But yeah, no, I do try to put out a lot of content, and like cool, interesting stuff I try to put behind the paywall as well.
And you cover a broad array of things that happen within the court and all different subjects. So, you learn a lot about how these systems work from all different angles, from different cases. And it's really, really enlightening just to see the things that we don't see on TV and to understand the inner workings of this. And from personal experience, his interviews are phenomenal that he does. He's had people that he's featured, such as Samantha Baldwin, who's been on this show. And just so many incredible parents, people like how he was saying wrongfully convicted criminals. There's just a lot of things in topics and subjects and people on there that you can learn a lot from. And his work in particular stands out to me. I
did interview Jeff Deskovic, who is wrongfully convicted, exonerated. And he, if you want to learn about criminal justice, he knows it really, really well. And he can, he's the one who told me that eyewitness testimony is the weakest form of testimony. He really has a keen understanding of how the inner workings of the criminal justice system.
Amazing. If you want to send that to me, I'll add that one in the show notes too. We can put that down there.
I will. Yeah, that was a very good interview in itself. All right. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you so much for everybody listening. Again, go support Mike. All the links will be in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. God bless you. And we will see you all next week.